An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There's a conversation that many people have had with themselves at some point. A call ends, a disagreement settles, a situation leaves something uncomfortable in the body, and the doubt creeps in. Am I overthinking this, or is something actually wrong? It's not an easy question to answer because there's no obvious answer. And the problem is that if you start searching for one too intensely, you can end up seeing threats where there aren't any. That tension between awareness and suspicion, between judgment and paranoia, is the territory worth exploring carefully. Because learning to recognize manipulation is useful, but doing it badly can lead somewhere difficult. A state of permanent alertness, where every gesture from someone else becomes evidence of something sinister, where relationships stop being a source of connection and turn into labyrinths full of traps. From that place, life with other people becomes exhausting. Not because everyone is manipulating you, but because you start acting as if they are. The starting point has to be this: influence is an unavoidable part of social life. When someone asks us to change our plans, when a friend expresses disappointment over something we did, when a partner says they need more time together, there's a form of pressure involved. That doesn't make it manipulation. Every relationship involves adjustments, negotiations, moments when two people's desires don't line up, and some kind of balance has to be found. Mutual influence isn't a flaw in our relationships. It's how they work. Persuasion is part of this too. Convincing someone, laying out arguments, appealing to emotions so an idea lands with more weight. None of that is manipulation in itself. A person can persuade someone else honestly, with real information, with a genuine perspective. The difference isn't that there's an attempt to influence. It's in how that influence is applied and at what cost. Manipulation involves distorting someone's perception, using incomplete information, manufacturing guilt, exploiting insecurities, or generating confusion to get something that the other person, if they had full clarity, would never give. So the line isn't always found in stated intentions. It's found in the effect something produces, and whether that effect follows a sustained pattern. This is one of the most important things to understand when trying to tell the difference between a genuine conflict and a problematic dynamic. Repetition. A person can be emotionally clumsy in a hard moment. They can say something hurtful when they're under stress. They can ask for too much when they're in crisis. None of that is necessarily manipulation. What starts to point towards something different is when those patterns repeat consistently, when they always produce the same effects in the person on the receiving end, and when the dynamic re-establishes itself every time someone tries to step out of it. There are signals that, in the context of that kind of repetition, are worth paying attention to. Persistent guilt is one of them. Not the reasonable guilt that shows up when you've actually done something that hurt someone, but a vague, objectless guilt that reappears every time you try to set a limit or express a need of your own. When someone learns that voicing what they want automatically comes with an emotional cost in the relationship, the control mechanism is already in place, even if it's never been named. Sustained confusion is another signal. Not the natural confusion that comes from a complex topic or an unfamiliar situation, but the feeling that conversations always end somewhere different from where they started, that the same events are remembered in completely opposite ways, that you leave exchanges not quite sure what happened, but somehow feeling responsible for something. That persistent fog can be the effect of a dynamic that works by destabilizing the other person's judgment. When someone stops trusting their own perception because their perception is always being questioned, they've lost something important: the ability to evaluate themselves from the inside. Emotional exhaustion also says something. There are relationships that are hard but nourishing, and there are others that produce a particular kind of drain, not because of what they openly ask for, but because of what they demand implicitly, through the energy it takes to constantly recalibrate, justify yourself, or anticipate someone's reactions. That tiredness carries information. It doesn't always point to deliberate manipulation, but it does point to something in the dynamic that isn't working in a balanced way. Recognizing these signals, though, shouldn't lead to a paranoid reading of every relationship. Because generalized distrust distorts things too. A person who starts seeing hidden strategies in every comment, who interprets affection as calculation and generosity as future debt, isn't more protected, they're more isolated. And in that isolation, something valuable gets lost. The ability to receive genuine care, to be surprised by someone else's good faith, to build something with another person without measuring everything in advance. Emotional discernment is not distrust. It's something closer to attention. It means noticing how you feel inside a relationship, not just in the tense moments, but in the overall pattern. It means observing whether the limits you set are respected, or whether every time they appear, there's a response that wears them down. It means asking yourself whether you can express disagreement without the cost being disproportionate. It means noticing whether a relationship leaves you with energy or consistently drains it. Setting limits from that place doesn't require becoming a suspicious or guarded person. It requires knowing yourself well enough to recognize when something is working and when it isn't. And that is very different from going through life reading bad intentions into every gesture. The difference between those two attitudes is significant. One protects without closing you off, the other closes you off without fully protecting you. Something else is worth naming here. Manipulation isn't always conscious. There are people who learned certain relational patterns in environments where those patterns worked as survival strategies, who generate guilt without realizing it, who need control because losing it produces genuine anxiety. That doesn't make the effect they have on others any less real, but it does change how you understand what's happening. Recognizing that someone operates with problematic dynamics doesn't require labeling them as a malicious person. It requires deciding what place that relationship holds in your life and what conditions would need to exist for it to remain livable. Understanding manipulation, then, isn't about learning to distrust. It's about learning to read more clearly what relationships actually produce, to distinguish between what's uncomfortable because it's new or difficult and what's draining because something is structurally off. It's recognizing the difference between being influenced and being controlled, between choosing to give ground and giving it, because the cost of not doing so always feels too high. Opening your eyes to those distinctions doesn't mean closing your heart. Clarity doesn't rule out trust. In fact, trust that's well placed, grounded in real experience with a real person, is far more solid than blind trust. Someone who learns to discern doesn't end up incapable of connecting with others. They end up making better choices about who they connect with and from what place. And that, far from making relationships poorer, can make the ones that remain genuinely better.